My husband Larry and I were living over in England. He has a PhD in animal science, and we were studying mad cow disease. And both of our positions were coming to an end, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to do something in agriculture, something that would involve our 3 children, and something that would be financially viable. And about 2 weeks before we were coming back to the United States, Larry came across the British Sheep Dairy newsletter. And he said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to milk sheep. We settled in Vermont, and Larry came across import figures that showed that in 1992, almost 50 million pounds of sheep's milk cheese was imported into the U.S., and only a very small percentage was actually produced here. And what was lacking was dairy breeds. Our ancestors brought over meat and wool breeds. And so we contacted USDA, contacted all different embassies throughout Europe, throughout the world really, and ended up narrowing it down to England, Belgium, and Netherlands as potential places to import sheep from. We went over and visited England, and we were very disappointed in the animals we saw and the lack of production records. And when we went to Belgium and the Netherlands, we were extremely impressed. And then in 1996, we imported East Frisian dairy sheep and the Beltex meat sheep and brought them over here to the United States.
When they got off the plane at JFK at about 11 o'clock at night, there was quite the sensation on the airfield, and all the airport workers, I don't think any of them had ever seen sheep before, so it was quite a gathering around the sheep. People were asking what they were and why they were there, and so it was a really exciting time.
And the sheep are lambs, and they have these huge ears. And so they're all looking at the crate, very curious, just like little children, looking all around, wondering what's going on.
The sheep passed the quarantine, and they came to our farm in Vermont, and for the next 2 years, everything was amazing. It was a true family business because all of our children were involved. Our son Francis was pasture manager, our daughter Heather milked the sheep, our youngest daughter Jackie learned to make cheese with Larry, and it was a thriving farm. The sheep did even better than we expected. They produced more lambs, more milk than we expected, and we were really pleased with how things were going. And then in July of 1998, instead of receiving our certification, USDA showed up at our farm and said, we're concerned that your animals could be susceptible to mad cow disease, and then put us under a quarantine.
These people are victims of the fact that by dint of circumstance, they've imported the wrong sheep at the wrong time.
Larry and I thought this was something that was based on science, and that this was something that we would be able to resolve very quickly, but instead it turned into this huge political battle that ended up being emotionally and financially draining. And it just went on and on for years, and we finally ended up taking USDA to court. And 17 days before a Second Circuit Court hearing, they showed up at 5:30 in the morning with 27 armed federal agents and 13 USDA officials, and cleared out our entire barn. Animals that we had imported from Belgium, from the Netherlands, even sheep we brought from New Zealand. Took them out to Iowa and killed them for a disease that doesn't exist. When USDA came after us, the impact was felt not only by our family, but by the agricultural community, by our local community, by the agricultural community in the United States and actually across the world, because our issue was covered by media all around the world, and USDA implicated sheep as being susceptible to mad cow disease. And so that affected shepherds, it affected cheesemakers, it affected the tourism here in Vermont. Everyone had this fear, was there actually mad cow disease in sheep?
They just tried to do everything that was right. They wanted to bring a breed that could be here, could work, that could be unique to the area, and again, as I said, to have something unique. And it seemed everything went wrong. The scare in Europe, the mad cow scare, the science that is hard to determine whether you're accurate or not, and a science that would require generations of the animal to know what you're doing. Everything worked against it. My heart goes out to them.
Is it possible that sheep can have BSE? And to answer that question, a group of English sheep researchers in 1988 have done research by which they took a homogenate of 4 BSE brains. They have done testing in which they used that brain material by either feeding sheep and goat and injecting intracerebrally sheep and goat. And in both those circumstances, those sheep and goats developed symptoms comparable to scrapie, but were really BSE. So in research situations, people were able to infect sheep and goats with BSE. The question that arises afterwards is it also possible that that situation can happen with sheep and goat in the fields? And since the beginning of 1997, all the countries in the EU do testing on BSE in sheep. And there has, until now, never been found a case of natural BSE in sheep and goats in the European community.
After the sheep were taken, I had a really hard time dealing with the emotions of everything that was going on. And Larry suggested that I write a book. And I kept thinking he was nuts. The last thing I wanted to do was dredge everything back up. And eventually it got to the point where I sat down and started to write. And I found it very healing. It was a lot of fun to write about all the good things that happened, building up the business, all the wonderful friends that we made along the way. I started doing research, and because of the research, we reopened the court case. I uncovered an incredible amount of corruption on the part of USDA and found out that the actions that they took against us were not based on science, that it was an abuse of science and an abuse of power. I tend to be an optimistic person, and I think that things happen for a reason, and I think we went through this for a reason. And as a result, our family is much stronger. The community really bonded and gathered around us and supported us.